Yuji Itadori has been through some of the worst moments throughout Jujutsu Kaisen. He has seen his comrades die, and at times he's been too weak to do anything to the antagonist, but at other times, Yuji has been strong enough to fight and even beat a main antagonist. Yuji wants to be strong enough to protect not only his friends, but innocent people as well. But as things stand right now, he isn't strong enough to protect everyone. Yuji definitely has the determination needed to reach great heights, but is it possible that somehow Yuji Itadori can become the strongest? We will be looking at everything that goes into a character needing to reach great heights, from mindset to abilities, determination, their growth rate, and everything else to determine whether or not Yuji Itadori can become the strongest. So first, when it comes to Yuji, we should start with his mindset. Out of everything that Yuji has, from abilities to IQ, combat IQ, potential, and everything else, I think that Yuji has the mindset for what it takes to become the strongest. I think that Yuji actually has the strongest mindset out of every character in the whole series. Time after time throughout Jujutsu Kaisen, we see Yuji being put in horrible scenarios where he's literally pushed down to his feet, and it seems like he cannot find it to even move forward anymore. And although he has had help sometimes getting up and pushing forward, we've also seen a bunch of times where Yuji has had to push forward on his own. There are plenty of moments that show Yuji's resolve, but the moment that shows Yuji's resolve the best is after Sukuna uses a domain expansion to destroy Shibuya. We see that this is like the straw that broke the camel's back. We see that Yuji is falling to the ground crying over and over because he's realizing that Sukuna has just murdered an entire city within his body. We see Yuji crying and scratching and clawing at his face, just telling himself to die over and over again, and he's remembering why he needs to be executed. But we see that on his own, he was able to calm himself down and say, I need to move. With how things have gone, I'm nothing but a murderer, but I need to fight. This is like the most troublesome thing that Yuji has had to deal with up to this point. An entire city has just been murdered basically on his hands. And although we all know that it wasn't Yuji that murdered everybody, Yuji is taking blame for this. And even with dealing with all of this, he even calls himself a murderer, but recognizes that he needs to continue pushing forward. We see multiple times that Yuji is willing to die and sacrifice himself as long as it means that the greater outcome happens. We see that Mahito even says that Yuji has no regard for his own life. And this is even backed up when Yuji is fighting against Choso. He says that even if he dies, it doesn't matter as long as he can stop Choso, because the main thing is saving Gojo, and Yuji himself doesn't have to be the one to save him. We see this multiple times throughout the series. In all of these high stress situations where death is on the line, we see that Yuji is able to calm himself down, resolve himself, and keep pushing forward, no matter how dangerous the case is. We see in the fight against Choso, when he's pushed to almost the brink of death, Yuji has a bunch of thoughts running through his head. He's asking himself where he got hit. He thinks that he's going to lose, and he even says, I'm going to die. But then we see on the next page that Yuji resolves himself. He calms down and we see his curse energy flare up, and he says, I understand my role. Turn fear into curse energy and clear my mind of all distractions. And you see, these are just examples of Yuji's resolve to keep pushing forward no matter how bad a scenario is. When it comes to Yuji's resolve to get stronger, it's insane. Yuji is a fast learner. We see that when he fights against Todo and Goodwill, Todo says that Yuji has his curse energy control all the way messed up. And after he teaches Yuji how curse energy works, we see that Yuji gets on another level. Todo says that he's completely different from a moment ago. He's growing by devouring Aoi Todo. And then after this, we see that Yuji goes on to break the Black Flash world record, which is why we should get into Yuji's insane growth rate. Gege explains in the fanbook how Yuji grows in strength. Gege says, considering that I didn't intend to improve Itadori's battle score that much at the time, I figured that having him grow stronger through many defeats would be convincing enough for the readers, even though he didn't have a training arc. And then we see that Gege compares the watching movies part to Kakashi's climbing trees part in Naruto. We see that this idea of having Yuji grow stronger through fighting itself is what has made Yuji grow faster than other characters throughout Jujutsu Kaisen. We even see when Todo pulls up to help Yuji fight against Mahito, Todo sees that Mahito can use Black Flash, and Todo says, "Even this cursed spirit uses Black Flash. The one who is now being left behind is me. You've gotten strong, brother. Are you gonna just sit still, Aoi Todo? Are you gonna let your brother feel alone again?" We see this is really important because at the beginning of the series, Todo was like the strong guy. He was the bully who was super strong and would just push people around. But at this moment, we see that Todo is realizing that he is the one who has been left behind. Yuji has been growing so much throughout the entire series that he has now even surpassed Todo, who was the strong guy from the start. When Yuji reunites with Choso and they're fighting together against curses, Choso recognizes Yuji's strength and says, "Incredible. He'd already impressed me with his power when we fought, but since then he's added finesse. Fluid control of curse energy along with unreal physical strength. He is now a demon god." So we see that Yuji's curse energy control has gotten even better since Shibuya, which has always been the thing with Yuji. We saw it since the beginning of the series that he has unreal physical strength, but Yuji's problem was that he didn't have the curse energy control to go along with it, so he wasn't using his full potential whenever he punched somebody, and that is why Todo said back in Goodwill that he needed to learn how to control his curse energy better, because if Yuji could combine his physical prowess with curse energy into a single punch, it would deal a big chunk of damage. And another very important aspect about Yuji is that even in fighting, he can take a bunch of damage himself and continue to keep fighting without falling back. We see this a bunch throughout the series, but the most recent one was when he was fighting against Sukuna, and Yuji was just getting slashed over and over again but continued to keep pushing forward. We also see in this same fight that when Yuji and Sukuna go crashing through a building, Yuji is able to kick a part of the building at Sukuna, and even Sukuna is surprised where he says, what is this strength? Yuji, when he's angry especially, just gets stronger than ever, which is explained throughout Jujutsu Kaisen, and Todo even says it himself, that even a smaller, weaker opponent can beat somebody who's stronger when he's mad, because when you're angry, you get a lot of curse energy. But the key is controlling this curse energy, and the best way to control curse energy when you're mad is to analyze the situation you're in and resolve yourself so that you don't go haywire with your curse energy, which is what we see Yuji does when fighting against Sukuna. Which is why even Sukuna, who has been inside Yuji the entirety of the series, is surprised by the strength that he is now displaying. Because not only has Yuji just grown so much, he is also extremely angry but also controlling his curse energy, which makes it to where he can now display incredible strength, and that is why Sukuna is shocked by this strength. Now, when it comes down to Yuji's fighting style and his abilities, we have to look at what it would take for Yuji to surpass everybody and become the strongest. Now, right now, Yuji doesn't confirmed have any curse techniques. It seems like he may have some sort of body swapping technique, because we see when Yuji is training with Kusakabe, he and Kusakabe are in each other's bodies, and Kusakabe tells Yuji that he needs to get used to this technique that they're using. So with this in mind, Yuji would have to take this sort of Maki and Toji route in order to be the strongest, because he doesn't have a domain expansion, and even though it might be possible for him to get one in the future, you know, that is a big might, it seems that with his fighting style of being a heavy hitter and a fast combatant, he needs to take the Toji route when it comes to fighting, which is fine. You know, Yuji has become accustomed to fighting without a curse technique for the majority of the series, and even if he does gain a curse technique now, I doubt Yuji would just completely switch fighting styles, because we see that throughout many different times that Yuji is most comfortable when he's up close on the opponent swapping hands. And I'm not saying this in an obvious way like, oh well yeah, Yuji doesn't have a curse technique so he has to throw hands. I mean, Yuji literally loves to throw hands with people. We see that Yuji is willing to get stabbed even if it means that he can get close to an opponent. Remember when Mahito stabbed Yuji a bunch of times, and Yuji even said to Nanami, "Hey, I'm fine, I just have some holes in me." Like, he literally has holes in him and he doesn't care. And then we see that when Yuji is fighting against Yuta, Yuji actually says, as long as I can steal my body with curse energy, I don't fear blades. Yuji just needs to get close to opponents so he can throw hands with them, because Yuji is skilled at fighting. Yuji even says that he has always been good at fighting. And this is something Yuji told us in chapter 3 of the manga. You know, this is something that Yuji Yuji has said recently like he's good at fighting, this is something that Yuji has said he was good at since before he learned Jujutsu, which means that in order for Yuji to become the strongest, he would have to break the mold for what Jujutsu is looked at in society. You know, Jujutsu is known as your curse technique battles. Even the Zenin clan says that they only value curse techniques, and it's said multiple times throughout the series that the essence of Jujutsu battles are curse technique usage. But Yuji doesn't really have one. He just fights with his hands and feet. And we even saw that Gojo said that Yuji, Yuta, and Hikari could maybe even be his level one day. So Gojo even thinks that Yuji has a chance at reaching this level. Now the weird thing is, when Gojo said that, he thought that Yuji would become accustomed to Sukuna's techniques one day. And now that is sort of thrown out of the window because Yuji no longer has Sukuna in his body, and now it seems like this curse technique that Yuji has is a body swapping method. Now, just because when Gojo said that Yuji could reach that level, Gojo thought that Yuji would have Sukuna's curse techniques, does that make Gojo's statement any less valid? Well, no, because even though Yuji will no longer have Sukuna's curse techniques in the future, we see that the reason that Gojo finds Yuji so exceptional is not just because of his mindset, but also because Yuji was a 1 in a million person who could suppress Sukuna with his physical body. We see that after Gojo brings Yuji back to the technical college and Yuji eats another finger, Gojo says it's confirmed. It's not just his body's resistance, he's able to control Sukuna without a problem. Only once every 1,000 years or so does such a person with a phenomenal ability like this appear. And it's sort of interesting how 1,000 years ago was the Heian era with Sukuna and the other strong sorcerers around, and Gojo is saying here that only once in every 1,000 years does somebody like Yuji pop up. So it's already set and established that even without Sukuna's curse techniques in the future, Yuji is exceptional, and Gojo saw this from the beginning of the series. Now, we do have to cover one very important thing when it comes to mindset, because it seems like Ryu and Sukuna have a sort of twisted idea of what it takes to be the strongest, but Gojo actually has a conflicting idea with Sukuna and Ryu, and we have to think about whether or not Yuji's mindset fits into either three of these sorcerers' ideals. So we'll first start off with Ryu. We see that after Yuta loses to Ryu in a fight, Ryu says, "I've seen it. What surpasses the horizons of sorcerers, cursed spirits, and strong fighters is overwhelming aggression that disregards all else like a calamity." And then he even says that Yuta is too soft. So we see that Ryu has this idea that in order to surpass the horizon of sorcerers and everything else, you need to have overwhelming aggression and you need to disregard everything like a calamity. So we see that Ryu is basically saying you can't be a nice, loving, and caring person and also become the strongest, because from Ryu's knowledge, you need to be overwhelmingly aggressive and you need to sort of disregard everybody. But I don't think that this is the only way that becoming the strongest can be achieved, and I'll get into why, but first I want to say Sukuna's interpretation on what it takes to be the strongest as well. We see that when Sukuna is talking to Jogo, he tells Jogo that he should have burnt everything that he desired to a cinder to reach the heights of Satoru Gojo and not to worry about the future or identity, but Jogo lacked the hunger to take hold of his desires. And we also see that Sukuna says that when you compare yourself to those around you, it leads to weakness and stunts your growth. So we see that Sukuna also has this idea of needing to burn everything to a cinder, and that this is what is needed to reach the heights of Gojo. So we see that Ryu and Sukuna have a similar point of view. This point of view that you need to not care about anybody, that you need to not care about anything, that you need to be super aggressive and burn everything around you to a cinder, and that this is the only way to become the strongest. Now, the reason that I think that Ryu and Sukuna can be correct that this is a way to become the strongest, I disagree with the both of them that this is the only way to become the strongest, because we see that Gojo just flat out disagrees. We see that Gojo tells Ijichi that he has a dream, that Gojo wants to reset the crappy Jujutsu world, and that he wants to foster and raise strong and intelligent allies. And actually, the next panel after this is when Gojo says that Yuta, Hikari, and Yuji would have all been as good as he is someday. So we see that Gojo thinks that in this environment where sorcerers can depend and love and care for each other in a good world, that there are still ways that you can become the strongest, because Gojo thinks that in this new world that he can create, Yuta, Hikari, and Yuji can reach his level. Not through hate, not through burning everything to a cinder, and not being overwhelmingly aggressive like Ryu and Sukuna say, but rather through a friendly and camaraderie environment. And another thing that is specific to Yuji that no other character has is Yuji's ability to just land black flashes when he needs to. No other character throughout this series can land as many black flashes as Yuji can. We saw all of the black flashes he landed against Hanami, and we see even more black flashes being landed against Mahito. And you see, the reason that black flashes are so broken within themselves is because whenever you land a black flash, you actually reach 120% of your potential. And then we see that Nanami says that whenever people are in a black flash state, it's as if controlling curse energy is easy to them. They're in a state called the zone, where athletes get in and it feels like everything just becomes natural. This is the state that Yuji can perfect fighting in given some more training. Because even though it says that no sorcerer can use Black Flash at will, nobody hits Black Flashes like Yuji. So it's not just Yuji growing in physical strength and growing in combat IQ as well. Yuji can also grow in a way to where he can always be in a Black Flash state as long as he perfects the use of landing them. And at first thought of just hearing that, it sounds sort of absurd that somebody can just master a Black Flash, but if anybody could do it, it would definitely be Yuji. Now remember, the title of this video is whether or not Yuji can become the strongest, not can Yuji just become really strong, or just can Yuji become special grade. In order for him to become the strongest, this means that Yuji would surpass his fellow comrades Sukuna and possibly Gojo. Now the thing that is really important, and I hinted at it earlier, was Yuji's lack of a domain expansion. Because we know that domains are brought about using your imbued curse technique that you were ingrained with, and Yuji doesn't have one of those. But it is sort of tricky whether or not Gege would take the route of Yuji having a domain expansion, because he maybe can expand his domain with the curse technique that he now has, assuming that this body swap is a curse technique that he now has. Because reaching a tier like the strongest without a domain expansion would probably be impossible, because at any moment if somebody opens up their domain and hits you with a sure hit, you would be really susceptible. You know, it is even said that Gojo is susceptible when he is in a domain expansion. So Yuji, even if he was somehow to be super fast and super physically strong, he would need some sort of anti-domain technique, even if it is just a simple domain. Because fighting without any domain techniques at all is a big hindrance, especially when we're talking about becoming the strongest. So I would say that Yuji definitely would need to learn at least a simple domain, and he probably will gain a domain expansion depending on how Gege sort of uses the rules of Jujutsu Kaisen in order to decide whether to give him one or not. But looking back at everything about Yuji, his abilities that he has, his superhuman strength that he knows how to utilize, combined with his curse energy control that keeps getting better as the series goes on. Remember when I said Choso now called Yuji a demon god? Because in just that amount of time from when Yuji first fought Choso to when he reunited with Choso again before they fought Naoya, Choso says that Yuji has grown so much that he has added finesse and refined his control that he now thinks of Yuji as a demon god. So imagine this amount of progression in that amount of time, and span this over the next couple of years, combined with Yuji's determination, combined with the fact that Yuji is literally called superhuman many of times throughout the series because of his immense physical prowess. And also we know that Yuji can just keep moving forward, whether he is stabbed, whether he is cut. He literally says he does not fear blades. Yuji's potential is definitely through the roof. And to the question of whether or not Yuji can become the strongest, I will say it comes down to two main things. Whether or not Yuji keeps this firm resolve that he has, and he truly decides to keep pushing forward so that he can become strong enough to protect all of his friends. I think that this mindset is going to be the main driving factor depending on whether or not Yuji can reach the level of the strongest. And the other thing that I think will become just as important is what angle Gege decides to take about this new technique that Yuji has, and whether or not he'll be granted a domain expansion, and if this technique would turn out to be more useful than we thought or less useful than we thought. But if I had to guess right now and give a final answer on whether or not I think Yuji can become the strongest, I would say I'm sort of in the middle, but I would lean more towards maybe. I would say Yuji probably can become the strongest if he sticks to this mindset that he has, and also it depends on the angle that Gege takes with this new technique. But for the question of whether or not Yuji can become the strongest, after everything that I've said, I'm just going to leave the answer up to you guys. Do you guys think that with everything that Yuji has and his mindset that he can reach the level of the strongest, or do you think that even with his abilities and even any mindset Yuji decides to take, it will ultimately not be able to reach those heights? Let me know in the comments below, and I just want to thank you so much for reaching the end of the video. And if you enjoyed, then I would really appreciate it if you could leave a like and subscribe to the channel, as I do post on different topics that you guys give me and a few that I come up with on my own. Thank you so much for watching. See you next time.